Good evening, everybody. At least evening to our friends on the East Coast. Good afternoon to our friends on the West Coast, and to everybody else, a great big thank you for joining us this evening for a very, very special event. My name is Dr. Janet Rosenzweig, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of APSAC, the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. And we are so pleased and so honored to be bringing you this event tonight with our colleagues who created this wonderful film you all saw this weekend, Foster Boy. Before we get into our event for this evening, I'd like to just take a moment and tell you a few things that are coming up with APSAC that we hope you might participate. Please look at your screen in the gray box on the left side of your screen, and you'll see several really wonderful upcoming courses and training events. We're particularly excited about the work APSAC is doing to promote racial justice and child maltreatment, our online courses that are available. We urge you to take a good look at that list, and we'll have some links in the chat box that you can enjoy throughout, through after this event tonight. We also want to remind everybody that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. We will have a very special fundraising event coming up in April, our APSAC NEK, a virtual run walk. Get healthy, support a good cause, and we hope you can join us and participate with us. It is now my pleasure to introduce Stacy LeBlanc, the president of APSAC.
Thank you, Janet. And it's so exciting to be able to host this. I want to start off by just thanking our lifetime APSAC member, Peter Samuelson, and for his amazing work and bringing his colleagues to us today, reaching out to us. He presented at our colloquium this past July, and it was so well thought of by everyone who was in attendance. And after that week, we made him a lifetime member. And he's like, I want you guys to be able to bring this film to your members. I want to also thank our partners who are with us. We were able to bring it to other partnership programs. But right now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our past president, Dave Corwin, who initially made contact with Peter, to tell you about Peter, introduce him and his colleagues, so that we can have a wonderful discussion tonight. So thank you, welcome, and over to you, Dr. Corwin.
Thank you very much, Stacy. I've been given the impossible challenge of introducing our Peter Samuelson, the executive producer of Foster Boy and over 26 other Hollywood films. Peter is a serial pro-social endeavor entrepreneur. And his first major philanthropic effort was in 1982, which is a while ago, the Starlight Children's Foundation that helped make the wishes of dying children available to them. And he's helped through that foundation millions of families. I think, was it 40 million or 60 million families? It's a large number, I remember seeing. And in 1990, he partnered with Steven Spielberg on the Starbright World Foundation, which was the first online virtual world. And 1999 saw First Star, which is his foundation devoted to helping assure brighter futures for foster kids. I first saw Peter speaking at the Child Maltreatment Conference in San Diego in 2005, where he was presenting his EDAR, Everyone Deserves a Roof, answer for homelessness on the streets of Los Angeles. And in 2013, he initiated his Aspire Foundation project, which stands for, you'll help me with that, Peter, the
Academy for Social Purpose in Responsible Entertainment. Sounded like a really good acronym to me.
Yes, and you can switch it to education because it's your acronym and you can do what you want with it. I want to play 40 seconds.
That's exactly
out of an
right.
8-minute piece that you could go to his website, samuelson.la, and see. But this was particularly moving to me, and I want to share it with you.
Is that you are the most pro-social generation since the late 1930s. It's been abundantly researched. you care, you are passionate. The world is beset by challenges. We need to work together to make the world a better place, and significantly, we can. And in doing that, we make our own lives more enriched. We lift ourselves up. You leave the world a better place than the one that you inherited. Starlight, Starbright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might have this wish I wish tonight. Please meet my foster kids.
My name is Rosario.
My name is...
I think those are particularly inspiring words from Peter. And I remember when I first saw him in San Diego, he held up a cell phone and he said, "This is going to change the world because it puts the power into the hands of the public to document what is happening." And I think this last summer in June, when 17-year-old Darnella Frazier video recorded the murder of George Floyd, that proved it to me, as it basically changed the world, in my view. So thank you very much, Peter, for being with us. I'm done.
Well, thank you so much. It was all Samuelson-centric, so I apologize to my fellow panelists, but we'll try to be worthy of that introduction. I'm so happy to introduce the other panelists. J. Paul Dettany, Chicago litigator, who represents foster kids in dependency court and in civil court, and has won extraordinary verdicts establishing case law on behalf of foster kids and abused and neglected kids of all kinds. Jay's the man who changed my life because he's the one who dreamed up from his own personal experience the story that you saw over the weekend. And if you're here on our Q&A, it's that you didn't hate it so much that you were willing to show up here. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Lee Collins Wilson is the CEO of First Star, which, as you heard, is the philanthropy, the charity, the 501c3 that I had the privilege of co-founding in 1999. And Lindsay, who is an absolute subject expert, having cut the ranks, started as a teacher and then as a school principal, and then running one of the First Star academies. And when we were looking for a CEO, First Star, we kept saying, we need somebody kind of like a Lindsay. And then we said, well, what about Lindsay? And here she is as a CEO, and has done an extraordinary job for First Star and for our special kids. And Frank DeVort is clinical professor of law at the University of Michigan Law School. And I enjoyed visiting there and spoke in the law school to those interested in children's law. He's also chair of the APSAC Amicus Committee and a past president of APSAC. So thank you all for joining us. I want to start, if I may, Jay, with you, sir, by asking you what, you were struck by lightning, or what how did the idea come into your head for this film? Where did it come from?
Well, thank you, Peter. And I think, partly you had quite a bit of involvement in that, but stepping back a little bit, I have been practicing law for 32 years, and about 15 or 18 years ago or so, I had somebody come, and I've done various forms of litigation, and I had a lawyer send me a case, and he said, I don't know what to do with this. It involves 3 children who were horribly abused and raped and physically abused, and a cover-up by a social service agency. And I took the records, and it sat on my desk, as we lawyers sometimes do, because we think, well, this is a big one, and I don't know if I know that much about social welfare law. It was kind of an odd little niche. And I started researching it, eventually started looking at it. And of course, it was devastating. And then I found out, well, this case involves a private for-profit foster care agency. And I thought to myself, how is that possible? I didn't know that there were for-profit foster care company. And we filed the case. As you lawyers know, we start with the process called the complaint and then the discovery process. And pretty much when something's amiss when they start fighting you on every little thing, including producing documents. And eventually we got documents, and they tried to use the various laws, the Mental Health Act and the Juvenile Justice Acts of the different states, to prevent me from getting records pertaining to the older foster kid who abused the younger children. Finally, I did get those records after probably 2-3 years of litigation and lots of motions, and it revealed that this 16-year-old that was put in a home with 3 younger children was a sexual abuse victim himself and had abused his cousin, half-sister, was basically a predator. They had hid those documents and they failed to disclose it to the foster family. So we took this all the way, and we were about to go to trial, and they offered money in the last minute. And I realized that you have to do what your client wants, and the family wanted to be done with it, didn't want to put their children on the stand. And I realized that they wanted to do that because they wanted to settle the case finally, because they wanted to go public. So then I began to write some articles for some legal journals and all of that, and then eventually wound up taking more of these cases, and it became a passion more than just a practice. And my other passion, though, has always been writing, and from a younger age. And so my sideline was I went back to school for my MFA, and Peter's very good friend, John Schimmel, happened to be my professor, and I submitted a script. He said, write what you know. And so I wrote this, and it was a draft. And then he said, I have somebody I want to show this to. And he showed it to Peter Samuelson. Peter, we met the first time in Hollywood. I was nervous and impressed at the same time. And he said, well, first I want you to help me establish a branch of First Star in Chicago, and then I'll read your script. And we did. And then he said the other thing was, are you open to rewrites? And he red-penned my script quite a bit, and I rewrote it. And then he finally said, let's do this. And one thing led to the other, including him bringing on Shaquille O'Neal, and the rest is history. Here we are with the script. So hats off to Peter Samuelson and his ability to take this from A to Z.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jay. Frank, turning to you, we were very trepidatious in developing and producing the film, really about 2 things. We were worried about what will foster kids make of it, doing right by them. We'll talk about it in a moment with Lindsay. But the other thing we were paranoid about is, what will the subject experts say? What will the lawyers say? Will the social workers say? We got the balance between the good foster placements and the bad foster placements right? Are we doing justice to the truth of foster care in the United States? I'm no idea what you're going to say. I may leave mine as a result of what you have to say, but very interested in hearing your sort of learned and professional opinion.
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. And Peter and Jay and Lindsay, thank you for this film. I think it's an important contribution to our understanding of foster care. You know, most folks out in the world, they don't know anything about our foster care system, or they know very little about it. And so I think that anything that helps to educate the general public about what goes on in the foster care system is helpful. one of the things that impresses me about the film is that I think you do capture the complexity of what happens in the foster care system. So we take in the children who are the most traumatized, those kids who have have had the most difficult histories and whose families really cannot or will not take care of them. And so those children need homes. They need to come into the system. Early on in the film, the character that's played by Matthew Modine, when he's initially asked about this case, says something to the effect of, isn't this a public problem? Isn't this a public system? And why are there private agencies doing this? And I think that's exactly right. This is a public problem. And like prisons, the public should be responsible for it. We all have a stake in seeing that the foster care system is as good as it can possibly be. I think the film gets a lot of things right. These are complex cases. And the children who come in, some of those children's trauma converts them from being children into being damaging people, right? They're people who are damaged. Sandra Bloom, an expert in trauma psychiatrist, says, hurt people hurt people. And I think you see that in this film, the way that a hurt child turns his hurt outward and hurts other children. And I think from the adult perspective, one of the things that we must always remember, the law is very clear. The paramount consideration in any case in which a child enters our foster care system must be the safety and the well-being of the child. And so what does that mean? That means we must do much more to support families. In this film, this boy finds a family that is supportive and loving and does what we hope, what I call being irrationally exuberant about this boy. His foster parents adopt him and they love him like he is their own son. And that helps him to heal and helps him to move into a productive adulthood. And so I think that it captures the complexities of the foster care system. And I think that it gives us a lesson about what happens when we take our eye off that consideration of what is the best thing for the children, what will keep them safe, what will help them to enter adulthood productively, and how do we treat their trauma and address their needs. And so I think the film does a nice job of illustrating each of those points.
I think that's very kind, very just. I think Jay and Lindsay and I are of view, developed from our own experiences in, on, and around the care, that this is in many ways the last great American civil rights struggle that never really had day one. Because if you think about it, it's the only one or one of the very few where the victim class are underage children. And not only is the thing secret in most of the country so that they are voiceless, but also they don't employ lobbyists, they don't vote, they haven't got any money. And in fact, most of them, they're children. They don't know that this is not the way. If the system is defective, they don't know. If they're a victim of a defective system, they think perhaps, life is tough and I'm in it. This is what I've got. Let me turn to you, Lindsay. One of the great trepidations that Jay and I had all the way through this odyssey of developing and producing the film is what would foster kids make of it? And certainly you and I have had adventures in showing it to various of the teenage First Star youth. And then we've been actually able to use it as a springboard for some of them to be given more of a spotlight, more of a pulpit on national television and so forth. Would you like to perhaps speak about the film and Our Special Kids and how those two have interfaced?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to start off by saying it's an honor to be a part of the panel. Thank you, Peter, for inviting me. And it's great to see you, Jay and Frank and David, for the wonderful introduction of Peter. He is an amazing person. I'm very proud to be a part of his space. In terms of the film, what's so interesting is that Foster Boy, in its inception, just sort of thinking about it and getting it going, Peter was sharing with us, Jay, I'm sorry, I don't know if he shared that with you, but he was letting us know that the film was happening, that you were writing this amazing film, and that it had the potential to really change lives. And so, so we were all excited and eager to finally get a chance to watch it, to read the script, etc. When Shane Paul McGee, who was cast as the young man Jamal, came to the UCLA Academy, Peter mentioned for a period of time I was a director of the UCLA First Star Academy. He had a chance to talk to our students, and he wanted to ask our students, you know, tell me about your experience. What are you willing to share with me? And so what I asked all of the young people to do was, if you're willing to share a part of your experience, please do so, but write it down. So write Shane a letter. Shane sat in the back of the room with a pile of letters from each of our scholars. And let me tell you, this was, for some scholars, it was the first time, and it was probably a pretty lethargic experience, or an opportunity for them to let out how they were feeling. They were able to share that they were abused by a parent, or they were raped at a certain age. And what they wanted to convey to Shane was the importance of this young man's character, knowing that one day it would become a motion picture. And he wanted them to convey that our children are real children. They go through challenges, they experience what they experience. However, they still want to be happy. They still want to hold on to the thought of the American dream. They still want to be successful. They want to go to college. And so Shane took all of these stories. He ended up posting some of them in his trailer to remind him of these young people that he was representing. And that was powerful. But what was even more powerful was when we were able to screen the film for our students. So it was a little tough, because we have to think about triggering past issues and making sure that young people are prepared to see things and observe things that they may have experienced or someone else around them experienced. And so we had a long conversation with our students. We had some therapists come in. We talked about what the film would be about. And we ultimately had the opportunity to show it. Our students, throughout the film, you could feel the emotions from the crowd. They were excited, they were hurt, they were sad when the young woman who represented the foster care agency, the for-profit foster care agency, when she would come into the room, they would boo. They felt every emotion Shane was feeling, our First Star scholars felt. And at the end of the film, what was so remarkable was that our young people could almost distance themselves from what was happening while still realizing the importance of what that film is, right? They know that it's media, they know that it's a Hollywood produced film, but they were proud to know that they were a part of something that gave voice to their experience and gave voice to their experience at a high level. And so we were happy to be a part of the film. Our students were happy to be observers of the film and sort of be a part of the process every step of the way. But all in all, our young people are thankful to have had an opportunity to see themselves in Jamal's light, and to know that their stories would be represented well, and that amazing folks like the folks on this call would be able to do something with it, and hopefully enlighten more people about the plight of foster youth here in the United States.
Lindsay, can I just
The other thing that
I was going to just say one thing. Lindsay,
Sure.
your exercise by having the kids write those letters contributed to the film. So you should be a director someday, because Jamal took that and internalized that. And that was what he read those before he gave that scene in the courtroom where he broke down. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you.
So just right off the bat, I know one of the questions a lot of folks are asking is about what was fact or fiction in the movie. And we have a question right in the chat from asking about the scene with Jamal that was very moving and emotional to see when Jamal witnessed his adoptive parents burn down the barn. And in the chat, they're asking about that loving act. And another question I know a lot of folks have is about the closing argument. Was that actually used in court, and where did that come from, Jay? I'll just
Well, the barn, one of the cases that I had in Pennsylvania, they were farmers and they were a beautiful couple and they were very loving, and they didn't burn down the barn. They shut it down though, and they didn't go back to that barn again. But, you know, it's Hollywood and we have to, you know, have a little bit of more excitement. But interestingly, as far as a closing argument, when I was writing this script, I think Peter made a suggestion, and then one of our other producers or associate producers, Danny Mooney, said, "Can I read the closing argument from that case in Pennsylvania, the Bryan case it was called?" And I did. The part about wrapping your arms, wrapping your mother wrapped her arms around you, and we're going to have the American or the jury is going to wrap their arms around you with the Constitution, was something I did utter because it was in Erie, Pennsylvania, which isn't necessarily the prettiest town. Sorry if I offend anybody. But on that particular day, when I was given the closing, there was a bunch of American flags out, and they were having some sort of festival out in the courtyard. It was kind of a nice day. And I just looked out right before I was giving my closing argument, and I thought, you know, we have to bring what is America about this and our Constitution. So yeah, I was encouraged by the producers to use some of the actual deposition or you'd say the courtroom transcript from the closing argument in that particular case. Great question.
Do you want me to perhaps say what is creative license, like maybe the rap? Have you actually had a witness rap on a witness stand?
No, and I haven't had anybody tased in court like that. Some of that, and our lawyer could tell us that as well, our lawyers. So some of that was artistic license. But what the idea of that came from is the young man who was in Pennsylvania in that particular case had a very bad inability to speak and stuttering problem. And at one point during the cross-examination or the examination of him, and we prepped him and so forth, I said, Kenny, or young man, I'll use a different name, Danny, I said, you know, I'm going to ask you certain questions and just answer it, you know, and we went over it. But then you get him on the witness stand, and he was angry. He had been getting in fights and so forth because, as we all know, kids who are abused, especially young men, sometimes act out in a violent way. Sometimes young women act with self-injurious behavior, and it affects the frontal lobe and the development and all of that. We know that. And this young man they had cross-examined him about being violent, and then I got up on a rebuttal and I said, well, you're not violent now, and you know, you want to tell the story to this jury, don't you? And he looked at the jury and said, no, I hate them. And I looked down and I thought, I lost the case. You know, the man just told the jury, the young man just told the jury he hated them. But hats off to our American judicial system, because 12 people can get into a room and generally, and I believe this after 32 years of practice, I wouldn't keep doing it if I didn't, and these cases are draining. They get in there and they saw beyond that, and they saw this boy's pain, and they didn't take it personally.
You know, Peter, if I might, one thing that struck me as very true about this is that boy carrying his little notebooks with him wherever he went. I have seen so many children, you know, they have some notebook where they draw or they write, and that's their outlet. It's the way that they can process emotion. And I have seen kids for 30 years carry around tattered little notebooks and spiral binders and things. And that struck me as very real. And so much so that in many places in the country, we professionals, because, you know, as if we know what we're doing, right? We have begun to create for children or help children create life books for themselves, right? Books with photographs and, you know, school thing, you know, the kind of stuff your mother keeps in a box in some closet in the house, right? Your awards from school, your ribbons or whatever. We've picked up on that, fortunately, and helped children create these life books to take with them. And again, I just think that struck me as so true to life, that, kids do that. They carry around so much of their history in some tattered little notebook.
And the young man did have the
Well, and the other thing the other thing is that if you can give voice, I mean, the children have voices, but there wasn't anybody listening to them. If, as we do in First Star, you can really in the life skills section on public speaking, videography, being able to speak in public. We drag our students around, they meet the mayor, they meet the governor. We want to make them feel as though their opinion matters. Lindsay, I don't know whether you want to come in on that, but it seems, when we started First Star all those years ago, we thought, well, these kids get lousy SAT scores because they're moved around like cardboard boxes and they change schools each time. So what we got to do is to help them academically. Then what emerged is that was the easy bit. They're no more or less intelligent than any other several hundred American teenagers of the same age. Do remedial this, that, and the other. Suddenly they're up to grade level, and some of them go beyond grade level, and a lot of them get into college. But what was more subtle is that in life skills and encouragement, there's this crushing burden thing on their head. Lindsay, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, because a lot of what you've done that is totally brilliant is taking nothing away from the academic, because if you don't have an SAT score, you're not university. Just mention the statistics against the benchmark and how much of that is to do with life skills and self-esteem and reliability of the grown-ups.
Yeah, absolutely. So 98% of First Star scholars graduate from high school. About 89% go on to college. The majority of that percentage going on to four-year universities and then community college. So we're extremely proud of that number, knowing that the benchmark is about 50% across the United States. And when you actually look at the data state by state, you get to Colorado, you're about 23% of foster youth graduate from high school in 4 years, and it goes slightly up as you add the number of years. So we're really proud of that. The national benchmark again for foster youth is that 50% graduate from high school. Of those young people, 10% actually go on to college, and less than 3% will earn it. What's exciting about the First Star program, and this is a reality, not having experience in the foster care system, but really being immersed in it within the First Star environment, is that young people don't have a voice in the foster care system. This was mentioned earlier. Nor does sort of general public understand the plight and the challenges that young people experience in the system when they're going from home to home and school to school, and imagine being uprooted every 6 or so months. So at First Star, this is the only time really for our youth, especially as teenagers, where they're in one environment in terms of being connected to this university and their director for 4 years. And not only is this connection one that is academic, like Peter mentioned, but this connection is one that is social and emotional. We have directors that care deeply for their young people. They show up at school, they show up in the court building, they show up at the park for a young person's sports game. And while they're with us at the academy, we focus on voice. If someone doesn't realize the power of their voice, there are a lot of missed opportunities, and more than just missed opportunities, there's a lot of lack of just moving forward because you don't believe in yourself. So our young people, and this actually comes really by way of Peter, we do a lot of film recording and creating mini documentaries where students are forced to share their story, whatever part of it that it is. And it's not forced, but it's really building up these skills to say, you matter, your story matters, we want to hear it, and then let's talk about solutions and let's talk about growth and development. And so we feel like that aspect of the First Star Academy, which is probably king of all of them, it's most important to have the relationship and to build that high intervention, high touch environment that we do by establishing strong relationships, we're able to get to that 98% of our scholars graduating from high school, and we're able to send them on to college. And our alumni program is able to track our students. I just saw an email a few moments ago that we just provided technology to one of our alums. So if an alum needs a computer, if they need a tablet, First Star out of LA, we'll ship it to Chicago, we'll ship it to West Virginia, we'll ship it to Florida, so that they continue to have what they need, even when they're not in the 4-year program as a high school student. But their voice is important, right? Reaching out, tell us what you need so that we can give you what we can.
So Lindsay, if I could ask you a question, I love your outcome numbers for First Star. They're wonderful, heartwarming. Can you tell us, or the other folks on the panel, how does that compare to the outcomes you see with for-profit foster care?
So, you know, what's so exciting about the foster care system, and also very challenging, is that it's very different from state to state, county to county. So here in California, we actually don't have for-profit foster care systems. I know, you know, sort of just given the conversations I've had with Peter and Jay, for sure, Florida has for-profit. We know Illinois has for-profit. I don't know what the circumstances around how students ultimately, what their success rates are, or just what their outcome rates. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know, Jay, do you know, or Peter?
I don't think there's a specific statistic that shows, but I can tell you that there is it seems to me, I think, Peter, and you could tell us, it's either 24 or 25 states that still has privatized foster care in some form. A few states have only privatized.
I think it's up to 28 states that permit it. I can tell you this, we're big on research. Helpfully and shockingly, a bipartisan Senate committee in 2007, a lot of time on researching outcome differentials, the delta between for-profit and those, on the other hand, that would be run by 501c3 or by local government itself. I've got in my computer, and if anybody wants them, I'm happy to share them, those statistics. It's right there. There's two fountains of knowledge. One is the Senate Finance Committee in their 2017 report and press releases and so on and so forth. And the other one is BuzzFeed, online newspaper, for want of a better description. They did a lot of in-depth investigative reporting. And also there's quite a lot of it in Jay's cases, the other cases brought on behalf of youth. I mean, Jay had them thrown out of a state, one of them. I think it is conclusively the case that the outcomes are considerably less good for the children. And when you then poke into why would that be, answer is because they have reverse incentives. If your ultimate goal, and I'm saying this as a big capitalist, I'm all for it, you know. I love my 401k. It's one thing to make a buck, sell it to people. I'm all for it. But seriously, to make money on the heads of children, the incentives in the for-profit ones are based on the placement of children and the moving children. So guess what? Move them a lot, because that's $3,000 a throw. That is the bonus that goes to the social worker. So if you set up your incentive upside down, then that's what happens. I think there's a good moment to note that what we're doing with the film right now, and this is sort of a philanthropic joint venture of advocacy between APSAC, First Star, Children's Rights in New York, which is that pro bono litigation firm on behalf of foster kids and other abused and neglected kids, and also the Children's Advocacy Institute at the University of San Diego, where they train up children's lawyers. We think there's a window of opportunity with the new government, the new White House, and the new Congress to actually do something about pushing back on for-profit foster family agencies, FFAs, because President Biden about 3 weeks ago announced that they are going to wind down federal support of for-profit prisons, incarceration run for a buck by private entities, the enormous Corrections Corporation of America, anyone? He has taken a principled position that this is wrong and we should not inflict profit on the heads of incarcerated prisoners. So there's a perfect opportunity to say, well, hello, forgive us, but if those are convicted felons that you think shouldn't have buck made on their head by a for-profit prison company, why are we doing it in 28 states to completely pure as the driven snow, never did anything wrong, foster kids? So we have a pretty well articulated plan. There are 3 op-eds, one to be signed by experts, a different one to be signed by actual foster kids, and a third one to be signed by Shaquille O'Neal. That's all work in progress at the moment, and we don't know what we can place where. But the idea then is to put a petition either on change.org or on whitehouse.gov, see if we can actually create a head of steam and get the licensing of profit entities either vastly better regulated, because that's the other side of it. It's sort of out of sight now, mind, and they run themselves and aren't really beholden to anybody. Or better still, let's stop doing that with the transition period. So that's going on at the moment. Have you got any other challenging questions?
We have
if they're challenging, I'll give them to Jay, and if they're
a couple questions
I'll do them.
came on the chat box, if I might.
Please.
Allison is asking us, why was, and I guess this more would be for Jay, why wasn't there checks and balances in the cases that you've seen? Why didn't the child have an attorney throughout the whole child welfare system, and or a therapist, and or a CASA, which I'm assuming in this case means a court-appointed special advocate?
Yeah. Well, in a lot of cases, Peter's right. First of all, we don't have a nationalized adopted standard for foster care. It's a patchwork system, as the lawyers can tell you, in different states. GALs, guardian ad litems, are often appointed for children in certain states. Sometimes quite often they're lawyers, but they're very busy and so forth. In this case, though, there wasn't a guardian. In one of the cases that I had, this movie is really an amalgamation of 3 cases, but in one of the cases I had, there was no guardian ad litem. Another case, there was a CASA volunteer, but they are volunteers, and some courts don't listen to them as well. I think it's a wonderful job, and they're wonderful people. The privatization, the private companies, and even the non-for-profits are supposed to, by contract, follow the DCFS regulations, but quite often they just don't. They ignore them, and I just took 2 depositions today of 2 women who unfortunately murdered a child, and the agency in that particular case had ignored, and I think I'm counting 43. There were 43 DCFS violations. So they're supposed to be, and in that ideal world, there should be a CASA worker, there should be a GAL. All of those guardians are in place, should be in place, but it just doesn't happen quite often.
One thing to follow up on what Jay is saying is that even when children have a guardian ad litem or an attorney, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act requires an advocate for the child, does not require that it be an attorney. But even when they have an attorney, even when they have a GAL, those individuals are not necessarily trained to really understand what's going on in the foster care system. We think there are about 50,000 lawyers in the country that represent children in civil child protection proceedings. The vast majority of those lawyers went to law school with no intention or no training in doing child protection kinds of work. They sort of fell into this in some backdoor way. established a practice in a small community, and this was a way to make enough money to keep the lights on. They don't know anything about child development. They don't know anything about child abuse and neglect and the dynamics of that. And they don't know anything about the kinds of things that Lindsay was talking about a couple of minutes ago, where she's talking about the importance of to build resilience in children, this idea of relational permanence, this idea of affect regulation and mastery over your own life, having some skill that you're good at, right? Having somebody who loves you and thinks that the sun rises and sets upon you, just as any parent would do, right? That's what children need, and that's very often lawyers have no concept of that. They've not been trained in child development. They've not been trained in how to interview children.
Frank.
Exactly right, Frank.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And Frank, one of the questions I personally had, and we've had in previous discussions, do you think this film would be helpful in training attorneys and judges? I felt it gave insight and emotion to it.
Yes, I absolutely do. I would love to see a situation where we play this film and then we have a panel discussion like this in a room full of lawyers and judges who are handling these kinds of cases. I think it could only be helpful.
It's Frank, you hit on a point too, with regards to it comes a rubber stamp. Quite often the GALs they take the cue from the social worker, and it could be the social worker in a privatized situation. Right. They don't go and meet the child. There's no requirement that they go to the home and meet the child or do any of that. They are lawyers, and they're only supposed to look at the paperwork and make sure it's right, and then they ask the social worker, and then they sort of serve as a in between the judge and the social worker.
Yeah, and we should all ask ourselves this: if, God forbid, we had to go to court in a position of potential jeopardy, there's nothing the matter with court-appointed special advocates. I've met hundreds of wonderful people go on to themselves foster or adopt, and there's nothing matter with a retired real estate agent who wants to be helpful to young people and children. But if you or I, any of us, had to go to court, we would want someone who had the power to subpoena, document witnesses. We'd want someone who could file an order to show cause, and it just doesn't hack it. And then if you say, and if I was 9 years old, if I had the knowledge, I would want it even more because I would be clueless. Can I also say, responding to Stacy, Jay and I made this film as a commercial film, because a commercial film means it will have enough of an audience that you can pay the investors back. They might even invest in your next film. That's a good thing. But we made it at least as much as a tool, a weapon of war in the war for children's rights, especially in the foster care arena. And our goals were not only to shine a bright light, hopefully, on the truthful misfeasance of for-profit foster care, but there are other aspects of the film. One of is right to counsel. In half this country, kids do not get a client allegiant professional lawyer. And First On, this is another thing that anyone is welcome to email me and I'll send it to you. We've done every 2-3 years a report that's called, and what we do, it's not binary. There are 2,200 jurisdictions in the United States. Roughly half, the kid's a client's lawyer, and the other half, they don't get a client allegiant lawyer. And it's more subtle even than that. What's the caseload of that lawyer? Is it the same lawyer appearance to appearance? Is it one of the, do they get prep time? Or is it one of these where the lawyer meets their client in the hallway and says, hello, Billy, anything you want to share with me before we go in? Oh, look, they're calling us. Don't worry, it'll all come out in there. And what continuing education? This whole new, it's not that new now, this area made possible by PET scans, MRIs and so forth of the brain, where we completely understand how the brain is changed by trauma, and this whole new arena of trauma-informed care and representation and so forth. I think, bluntly, a lot of lawyers, even the ones working with foster kids, I don't think I've ever read that book. You know, the ACE scores, Dr. Felitti of Kaiser in San Diego, who invented that. We're trying to encourage a documentary at the moment about ACEs, you know, the point rating for subsets of abuse and neglect and how they are contributive to behavior and outcomes later in life. There's a science around this stuff that I think often doesn't go to court. Lindsay, talk a little bit, if you would, about how we've kind of, you've become a film producer to the extent that what film producers do is you're always upselling. You make a film, you're trying to make the next film. In this case, we were able to use, with the ABC television network, we were able to wave two carrots at them, weren't we? One of them was Shaquille O'Neal and the other one was the film, in order, frankly, to get Nightline to come talk to our kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we were able to get them to talk to our students about a really pressing matter, and that is COVID-19, which we have not mentioned at all on this call. So ABC came in and they wanted to talk to our students about how has COVID-19 impacted their lives. So we had one young person representing our UCLA Academy to talk about her experience, and we had another young lady in New Jersey talking about hers. The young lady in California mentioned that she, during COVID, had already moved to 3 different foster homes in the midst of COVID, and this was maybe 6 months into the pandemic. And so we talked about, what does that mean? How has that impacted you? And she said it was challenging, it was tough. You know, your sensibilities and your emotions are already all over the place as a teenager. Well, when you get shuttled from home to home, because for one reason or another, that young person takes that personally, right? You think about ACEs, you think about, you know, parents break up. Well, what does it mean when you lose a family unit every 3 to 4 months? That also is extremely traumatic. And so she talked about how that has impacted her life as a teenager. She's 14 years old. She talked about technology and not having access to it, and reaching out to her attorney, reaching out to her social worker, because we know that school now is completely online. And so she started talking about those challenges. But at the end of the day, she had this beautiful smile and she was just very upbeat about what was to come. She was ultimately reunited with her biological mom and her triplet brothers. So she was one of a triplet, and her 2 siblings were all reunited with mom, which was a huge blessing. And we were really excited to see that. The other young lady out of New Jersey, she was an immigrant. Her mother came to the United States from Honduras. She was ultimately returned to Honduras, but the 3 young ladies, or 4 children, I believe. Her 4 kids remained here in the United States. And one of them, Marjorie, was a young lady that we were working with. She talked about being in the process of getting adopted right before COVID hit. And because of COVID, I know Jay can speak to this, you know, the courts were completely stalled. They were unable to see folks. And my father is also an attorney. So it was very interesting to see this maybe 2 or 3 week or like 1 month period where he just didn't have any cases. They were trying to figure out, how do you do a deposition through Zoom? And how do you talk to a client and really know that they're being truthful or gathering evidence, et cetera. So this happened in children's courts as well. And so because of this, this young lady was not able to get adopted by her adopted, the parents who were working with her for a period of time. And it completely fell through. The other reality of COVID-19 that I think that we all need to be really mindful of, especially as advocates, is that there's this gigantic issue around learning loss. And we talk about the achievement gap. For a period of time, the achievement gap was actually getting smaller. Well, COVID-19 has basically opened that right back up. Because of course, the dependence on technology and the reality that many children can't depend on technology. They don't have the proper laptop, internet, et cetera, in order to be successful in that space. And so our foster youth are going to be impacted by that. When you think about jobs, you know, I've read many articles that have talked about a shrinking workforce, not necessarily for your tech fields, but certainly for your blue collar fields. And many of those fields are young people, if they're graduating from high school, and that ends up being the only level of education that they end up earning, they go into blue collar fields. Well, we know that field is shrinking. What are we doing to support our young people to really ensure that they are prepared for this new tech age? And at First Star, you know, that's the work that we're doing. We're trying to stay, you know, months ahead of what is happening. We recently launched a national virtual STEAM Academy for foster youth all over the country. I'm going to include the website in the chat. And this is for young people that are in the system, that are current foster youth, but want to be appreciated and acknowledged in a space that they generally don't get to be in. They generally don't advance in math because they're not in school long enough to advance in math in one high school. They don't advance in science for the same reasons. We don't want that to be a reason why our young people are unable to be successful in the new booming field of technology and STEAM, right? Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And so, you know, First Star, we're trying to stay ahead of those issues, but that's something else that we have to talk about. We have to talk about the impact that COVID-19 is having right now, but what the trickle effect will be, or the ripple effect will be 3 to 5 years out. And that is up to us, the adults who are caring for these young people, to really be mindful and to step in and to fill that gap. So that's another area, Peter, that absolutely with our youth we are working on. And I hope that everyone is mindful of it and really putting together action plans for what their futures might look like.
Okay, so we have a couple of more questions or comments that have come in the, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me just say this to that. Two opportunities for everybody who is on this Zoom call. One of them is that the First Star STEAM Academy, which is delivered completely online, which is permanent. It's actually it's the First Star STEAM Academy for Social Justice, because it's got some social justice issues embedded in it. It is available nationally online. And if you've got students, clients who are in grades, what, Lindsay, 9 through 12,
yes,
you could absolutely put them forward to participate in First Star STEAM Academy. And the other opportunity for everybody here is that which you've just participated in, seeing the film over the weekend, and then being this Q&A, that's in Jay's gift and maybe a little bit mine. You can't advertise it, you can't sell tickets for it, but for anything which is closed in the sense of it's your members only, or it's to show to legislators or the mayor, the police force, or the medical doctors doing kits and whatever, you know what the film is about. It's about PTSD and what that is viscerally and what it does to someone after the trauma that caused it. It's about right to counsel, and it's about the iniquities of FFA's run for profit. And maybe its other is foster care should not just be about keeping the kids safe. It should be about some kind of reliable grown-ups in their life, people who, dare I say, love them and cherish them, and this concept that we all try and do to our own kids of unconditional love. Foster kids need that more than the average bear. If you think you can show the film in any way that is helpful to foster kids or abused and neglected kids generally, you email, and we're happy to take that very seriously. And we'll make that happen for you. We would love that. I'm sorry, Janet, I cut you off.
Well, that's okay. I'm just bearing some questions that have come in from our audience. If we're at the top of the hour, we were hoping to go maybe 15 minutes past the top of the hour, just so we're all on the same expectation with schedule. One question, and I think, Peter, maybe I'll give you 2 or 3 questions, then you can parse them out so I don't have to keep interrupting. One question we've got is possibly the attorneys, Frank or Jay. Do you know how common it is that foster kids are placed in a home, either state-run or private, where another child's got a history of perpetration? So if we can think about what we know about that. Someone else is mentioning the link between foster care and child trafficking. Sadly, that's a known connection. We're wondering if any of you all want to comment on that. And well, the last question is what folks can do to help, but maybe Peter, you might end on that and just remind folks how to get involved at the end.
I can
Sure.
answer the first question, and I'll let
So
Frank.
Frank, do you,
Second. one.
okay. All right,
If that
Jay,
makes
go for
I don't
it.
know as much about child trafficking as I do about children who are in. The first question was really whether or not. Can you repeat that one again?
Yeah,
I wanna
how
get it
often, what can you tell us about the incidence of kids being placed in foster care, either private or, state-run, where another child is a perpetrator?
We don't have statistics, partly because they're allowed to hide agencies, not-for-profits or for-profits, behind privacy laws for the children, so to speak, which is a problem. But anecdotally, I can tell you that I've handled probably 30 of these cases now, 40 perhaps, in the last several years. And quite often, again, although the DCFS regulations would state that a child who has had a history of being a sexual aggressor, predator, I don't like using that word, but aggressor, or it's not supposed to be placed in a home with younger children. Should be in a no other child home and so forth. Again, they ignore these. So I can just say anecdotally, those are probably a third of my cases. So it happens way, way too often. And then there's other cases, I get calls all the time, and it might be that it's beyond the statute of limitations for a particular state and so forth. So there's just, I believe it's a prevalent problem within the system.
Thank you.
And we misuse the word trafficking generally in the United States because I would say most people believe that trafficking requires transportation, and actually it doesn't. It's the sexual exploitation of an underage human being for commercial gain. And it can be done all in one place. We do know that sides of the same coin are foster care, especially group homes, and the grooming and the recruiting by pimps of underage children for sexual commercial exploitation. They park. I remember reading a whole thing about this, that the pimp that they caught, would park outside the group home. A lot of them are not locked facilities, so the foster kid goes out, and especially if they're upset. And remember, quite a lot of these children have been sexually exploited, and it's what got them into foster care in the first place. So there is a distorted sense of what's right and what's wrong, and there's a considerable vulnerability. And then we make it even worse, because then the press writes about child prostitutes being arrested. In some places in the United States, completely raving mad. There is such thing as voluntary child prostitution. They're underage. They have no ability to prostitute themselves. They have been exploited by someone who put them in that position. And then in some places, a subset of that, we try them as adults, and if they're found guilty, or even before they're found guilty, they're incarcerated or they don't make bail. They're locked up with adult prisoners, which of course makes the whole thing that much worse. So it's a cruel system in many ways, And I think we have to push back on it. And one of the things that Jay and I are privileged to do is to kind of have one foot in the science of it on the need side and another foot in media. And whether it's Nightline or it's Foster Boy, the film, we think more noise needs to be made. We think this is in many ways the civil rights struggle that didn't begin because there wasn't enough noise around it. One of the First Star reports that we did is state secrecy and child America, where we looked at a specific year just a few years ago, 1,452 deceased children. And all we did was to look at, well, what was in the newspaper after the child died? Was there a blue ribbon commission? The mayor said this is never happening again. They fired whoever was responsible for that department. There were hearings and so on and so forth. Or did it just go very quiet after the original police report of a deceased child from abuse or neglect? And you never heard about it. It was never in the newspaper. If anyone wants these reports, again, if you email me, I'm delighted to send them to you, or they're on firststar.org. It's all right there. Both of the Nightline segments are on firststar.org. And also, it's a pretty easy way of contacting me if you would like to use the film Foster Boy for your organization. We're happy to look at that and make it possible. You can sell tickets, but you can certainly put an audience together. And one of the only good things about Zoom is how easy it is to put one of these Q&As together. Back to you, Janet.
Well, there was one other question, and that changes the topic just a little bit. Jay, when you talked about taking some license, people are hoping that the part of the plot where the attorney's own child was put at risk was poetic license, or was the private company evil enough that they went after the attorney's child?
That was poetic license, but I will say that in the case of Pennsylvania with the private organization, which I'm barred from saying, I'd love to tell you who it is, but part of the resolution at the end of the case was not to say the name of it. But their insurance adjuster or their private individual that handled claims, I was jogging, or I'm sorry, not jogging, I was bicycling down a road at the end of the day of trial. I was staying in a hotel, and I really believe, now maybe I'm crazy, I maybe it was long days of trial and you're exhausted at the end of the day. So, but I was driving my bike, and all of a sudden I felt this car swerve toward me, and I went off the road and I got scuffed up. And the next day I saw that car, it looked like the exact same car, and there was something distinctive about it, in the parking lot of the courtroom. And I saw the insurance guy, the claims guy, I should say, get out of the car. And I don't know, maybe he was trying to scare me. Maybe he was just trying to, he was mad at the end of the day of trial because it wasn't going so well for him. Or maybe I have it wrong, but something odd happened and I don't think I have it wrong.
I'm from Pennsylvania, and I think I know who you're talking about, and I don't think you're wrong. So
yeah.
Well, there you go. I'm glad he missed. Another thing that's not true in film, the character of Michael Traynor, played by Matthew Modine, is a far-right corporate lawyer who is either immoral or amoral at the beginning of the film, and it's Paul who shows him the light and saves the day and so forth. That character is just about the opposite of J. Paul Deratani, who is about as far from a far-right lawyer with blinkers on as he could possibly be. So I just want to correct that in case anybody thought Jay was a real awful person. He's
Peter,
not.
either you or John, I forget which one, in one of our meetings to go over the script, said I needed to create a little bit more conflict And one of the things that, and I think this is an underlying theme in the script, is one of the things that bothers me in our judicial system and so forth is racism. And and Michael starts out, would you say he's a racist or at least racially insensitive in the beginning? You know, he refers to the kid's hair and so forth. And I've run into so many of those lawyers, and this is obviously written pre everything that's gone on, Black Lives Matter and so forth. But an underlying theme is I wanted to address how quite often, you know, these lawyers or different corporate people do not see young African-American men specifically, and they just seem to have this very narrow racial ignorant viewpoint. And really it is the opposite. It is a film, hopefully, where Jamal saves this very broken guy and helps him with his character arc. And I have to thank the two of you to help push me in that direction.
Well, and I hate to interrupt, but interesting questions are popping up. Someone is just curious to know if it was just incidental that you cast an African-American judge, or was it intentional? This person found that to be really an impactful piece of the film.
No, we definitely wanted to have an African-American judge because we wanted him to, and also on a personal level, one of my favorite people who inspired me in the law, and he still is, he's now retired. He was an appellate court judge, but he was a trial judge. It was an African-American judge, and I had my first big case with him, and he was an incredible, a great legal mind. But we wanted this judge to basically be able to see through the light, and you have brilliantly played by Lou Gossett Jr. He's so good at what he does. And he basically sees this white corporate lawyer, and he knows that he's a broken character, and he's going to put him in charge of this case because he also knows he's a good lawyer. So that was a deliberate choice.
You know, one of the things that I think is really very true about this film too is this young boy. So many kids, you see teenage boys in particular, but girls also, you know, they develop this very kind of hard exterior, and they lash out very frequently. And so many people react to that without looking deeper and seeing the hurt child inside that, you know, that facade. And I think that's true of judges. I think that is true of lawyers. I think it's true of social workers sometimes. And I think that our whole system doesn't understand that again is a symptom of the trauma that these children have experienced, and the way that they develop these very hard exteriors as a protective mechanism. You know, they're kind of like turtles in some way, right? They've got a really hard shell, but once you get past that really hard shell, you know, there's a lot of softness inside there.
A lot of hurt.
A lot of hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Frank and everybody else who's a professional on this Zoom here, if you can use our film to do good, send us an email and we'll make that happen. And also, please don't forget what Lindsay said, which is that FAR can make a place available in our pure online, so it doesn't matter where they live in the United States. They are a high school age, grade 9 through 12 foster kid, an open case file. We would like them in our STEAM Academy for social justice. And it's a good time to join because it's just started. So hurl it at us. We want action points out of this wonderful Q&A, and we're so grateful, APSAC and NACC and your partners, for the opportunity to interface. I mean, it's thrilling, actually, to sit with and realize that the film maybe has done a little bit of good, and maybe with your help even more. We're very grateful.
Well, and Peter, we are so grateful for you to bring this to APSAC. I'm being prompted to close this to be respectful to everyone's time, but I want everyone to know that APSAC has joined with First Star and Children's Rights and others to advocate for the elimination of private for-profit foster care. As Peter has described, there will be op-eds and calls for legislative action that we will know about, and we want to share that with you. I think, Peter, you would be so pleased, and I have saved the chat for you because there's so many folks that have Jay, have written another screenplay for you in here. All kind of ideas. I've got
Love it.
chats on that too. So I'm saving that all for you. Amazing. 2, we have many folks who are shocked. They had no clue about the for-profit foster care system. So your film is doing just what you designed and is bringing so much hope for everyone here and inspiring. And there's so many takeaways, so many folks that want to bring this to their training academy, to their social work, academic faculty, bringing the film to you. So I think you're going to be getting many more calls for screenings for closed groups like this. And we thank you so much for bringing it to APSAC. We could not do this without you, and you have brought light to a story and to an issue that we couldn't have done without you. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And thank you for the panel for volunteering your time tonight.
Yes, Frank, Jay, and Lindsay. Star.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's
Everybody, thank you.
upsell it. Let's see if we can do even more.
That's right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Saving the chat.
Take care. Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you.